Welcome to Carib Nation. Today we are going to be looking at some of the issues surrounding crime and justice and security in Jamaica and throughout the Caribbean. First, let me welcome my guest, Miss SHA-SHANA CRIGHTON, who is Assistant Professor of Law at Howard University. SHA-SHANA has done extensive study on the Jamaican and Caribbean justice systems, and her seminal article was published by the Syracuse Journal of International Law and Commerce. My second guest is Wilfred Rattigan, who recently retired after 29 years as an FBI agent with service in different countries around the world and in a number of leadership positions in that agency. Let me start with you, SHA-SHANA. You have taken a look at the criminal justice system in Jamaica quite extensively, and you have seen some deficiencies which have contributed to the delivery of justice in Jamaica, and which I recall very well reading your article, and maybe I should refer to it as your journal piece, in which you said justice delayed is justice denied. And we also know that when you deny justice, you contribute to crime. And so could you elaborate a little bit on what your observations were with regard to the deficiencies that you saw in the criminal justice system?
Okay, so I took a look at delivering judicial opinions and the delay in delivering judicial opinions, and how that prevented people from appealing. And remember, the Constitution entitles you, each person going through the system, the right to a fair trial. People, cases were lagging in the system for like years. I think there was one civil case that was in the system for 20-odd years, which is just totally inept. That should not have happened. What I really also found out was that the courts are significantly overburdened. And they complain, and the complaint has been going on for years, because I remember, I think there was a 1994 study by Justice Wolf at the time that said, they need resources. And even the current DPP said, well, 30 years later, you still have the same or not many more resources, and you have an increase in crime. You have cybercrime. You also have businesses that are also sending cases to the court. So the cases in the courts are exploding, and the resources aren't there to handle it. Now, when you look at the inefficiencies in the system, and you're not getting your cases through, then people also just think, then, well, why not? Let's just take matters into our own hands. And then you have what's vigilante justice. I see, well, for example, or Chief Justice.
I'd like to come back on that in a little bit. Let me just ask Wilfred a couple of questions here, because he was recently in Jamaica, as a matter of fact, and he has been there a few times this year and has had a first-hand look at not just the high incidences of crime and the problems that are facing law enforcement. But I think Wilfred has had some very interesting ideas about some of the things that we need to do, and certainly the criminal justice system is one of them. But from a law enforcement perspective, what can you tell us that is currently going on and some of what needs to be done to make it better?
Well, the first thing is, how do you define the problem? Some people define it as a violent crime problem, and some people define it as a national security problem. And depending on how you define it will determine how you apply resources and what type of resources. But the number one problem I found, and again, this is not based on scholarship, it's based on anecdotal evidence plus my personal observation: corruption within the system. You cannot arrest your way out of corruption, and that's the plan we have in mind. You have to get rid of the corrupt officers first before you start dealing with the other things that are of priorities outside of the JCF. You find also that the structure itself is an 1870s construct, and it was given to us by our colonial masters, the British, and they've abandoned that system, and we're still clinging to that system, at least within the JCF, and it won't work. They also they're very, very top heavy at the high command, and I think it's getting to the point now where people are realizing that something has to be done. There has to be a complete reformation of that structure, and we're not even talking about how it ties into the judiciary and the penitentiary system, corrections. We're not even talking about, we're just focused primarily on the JCF. They tend to conflate intelligence and information. And so you'll hear, oh, there was an intelligence-led raid. And all it means is that somebody gave them some information about somebody. They're completely confusing both issues. They also complete the difference between management and leadership. They think because you're a manager, you're a leader, or if you're a leader, you're a manager, and so they're woefully lacking in that respect. In essence, I think they need to reform the complete system, and they also need to look at implementing an intelligence center, a fusion center, if you will, because they're still acting in silos. Even within the JCF, they're acting within silos. So MOCA, for example, the Major Organized Crime and Anti-Corruption Unit, which they consider to be the functional equivalent of the FBI, they don't share information readily with the rest of the JCF because of a trust factor, because of corruption. And now I think sometime this year, they will be on their own. There's a law that's tabled right now for them to operate independent of the JCF. So the question is, okay, who will conduct the intelligence function of the JCF? And the answer is, no one.
It seems to me that MOCA's focus is on investigating the police rather than providing intelligence for the police.
Well, that's why I'm calling for a complete reform of the system, because you have Indicom that's responsible for looking at police shootings as well. Okay. And MOCA is supposed to be looking at top-tier organized crime figures. But then there's also a component within the JCF called CTOC, counterterrorism and organized crime. They're doing the same thing. So there's just a multitude of components within the JCF looking at the same issue, not sharing information. And I suspect that at times you're looking at the same person, but they're not sharing information.
It seems to me that not only law enforcement seems incapable of dealing with a crime situation, but by separating out intelligence from the JCF, which is the Jamaica Constabulary Force, then they're handicapping the JCF even more, unless there will be some mechanism for gathering, analyzing, and sharing actionable intelligence with the JCF. Now, crime seems to be out of control. Homicide rates have increased significantly in the past few years. And for this year, 2018, it seems already on track to even get worse. A state of emergency was implemented in the parish of St. James. Is the justice system up to speed in terms of dealing with whatever comes out of that state of emergency to act in a manner that will bring justice and to protect the rights of individuals during this operation? Do you see that as something, SHA-SHANA?
Well, at this point, with statistics showing that, and the Minister Chuck actually said there were like 2,000 cases in 2017 that were still yet to be disposed of. And with a rate of like 15%, cases are just being disposed of by 15%, then criminals feel like they can act with impunity if they're not going to be punished. And when the Minister of Justice is saying, well, we should actually aim to get cases that are not solved or finished, completed within 5 years, we should just toss that. So if a criminal looks at that, then they figure, I can do anything. On the other hand, a victim will also, can you imagine a parent of a child who's been abused or who's been harmed, seeing that, well, it takes all this time to go to court. They may just want to act on their own. And then that goes to vigilante justice. I think one of the things that encourages me is I see that the reporting for carnal abuse and abuse against, sexual abuse against minors under 16, the reporting has been up, I think, it was 16 in probably 2016 and 100 and something in 2017. That encourages me in that people are reporting.
The question though, are they reporting or are there more incidents of the crime occurring?
Well, it could be more incidents of the crime, yes, but at least they are reporting the crime. Another thing...
And how long does it take to go through the court system to get justice?
Well, years. Minister Chuck has said, well, he envisions probably about 2 years to get to the system, but that's like not for another few years because the courts are complaining they can't handle the load.
When the politicians speak about what should be done, are the politicians providing the resources that are necessary and required to meet those objectives that they set?
They have recently hired 6 or 7 new judges. They have committed resources to hire judicial clerks. I've seen that they got a grant and they've outfitted some courts with special equipment. They are investing something, but it's nothing close to getting the courts up to speed to where they need to be.
When you speak of a court system that is backed up 4 or 5 years, adding 6 or 7 new justices is just a drop in the bucket. Now, let's be quite frank, because one of the things is that they can't give decisions in the 3 months that they are required to give decisions, because a judge has to leave the courtroom at the end of a trial with boxes of evidence and documents to take home with them if they are going to work from home. They don't have access to these documents electronically, which to me is a very simple process. All these documents can be scanned into the computer, and instead of traveling with a box, they travel with a flash drive. But that's another thing. And the politicians keep setting these targets, but not fixing the real problem. A judge can become far more efficient if he has the resources and the equipment to do his work.
And that's absolutely correct. And this is where, now that they have said this is what they want to do, let's see them put the money where their mouth is.
That never happens.
Let's see them put the money behind in the judicial system. I was deeply saddened the other day just to see our Prime Minister appoint Judge Sykes, yes, as acting and saying, let me see how he performs. I see that good sense has taken him over, and he's now decided to make him chief judge. But then, because
it's not good sense; it's pressure.
Oh,
public
well,
pressure.
well, I'll just call it good sense. Because at that point, you know, where's the separation of powers? What is he saying to the public? We have no faith in this
Yeah.
person.
Let me further compound the problem for you. For violent crime, particularly homicides, the clean-up rate or the clear-up rate is about 40%.
How much?
40%.
40%.
Right. So for every 10 homicides that are committed, the police will solve the crime 4 out of 10 instances. Now, of the 4 people that they'll arrest, the conviction rate is about 6%. So if I'm a criminal, I have nothing to fear of the judicial system. Because, you know, as you've heard, the time that it takes to go through from beginning to end of the case, it's years.
And
witnesses,
they're on
memories
bail.
fade, people, yeah, they're on bail to commit more crimes. That's what we're finding out. So it's a multifaceted problem, and it's going to take more than just appointing 6 judges or getting a few more cops on the beat.
At the beginning of this program, you mentioned incarceration as one of the pillars of and rehabilitation. Do you have any data on the recidivism rate of people who have been incarcerated and come back out and commit crimes and go back in?
I don't have specific data, but again, based on what I've heard and what my personal observation, you're talking about the same nucleus of people. It's not different people coming into the system. It's the same, well, except for the fact that you have so-called children now being involved in it, where they're being recruited. But if you look at the socioeconomic structure, it's essentially the same group of people, just maybe a different generation.
SHA-SHANA, do you have any idea about the recidivism rate?
No, I do know that in 2016 they had the Restorative Justice Act, which is different, but it's now trying to get folks at the initial state, like, you know, talking so that they troubles don't escalate and become major crimes. And that doesn't get in the system.
Is there anything you'd like to tell us about how we might go forward real quick?
I think, as we said, justice delayed is justice denied. If we are going to, not only is it affecting our people, it's also affecting how we look on the international scene. If we can't take care of our business, then, you know, how are investors going to come in and invest in our country? The DPP said, you know, our justice system is like Cinderella without ever finding a Prince Charming, and I loved that quote.
I don't think we're going to be that Prince Charming today, so
But I hope the government decides to put some money and to be at least a Prince Charming.
Will?
Well, there's so many problems. I don't even know where to start. You have an organizational problem, you have a structural problem, you have a management problem, you have a resource problem, you have problems on top of problems. And you have a community outreach problem, you know, the perception of the police. And as I said before, you can't arrest your way out of these things because then you're going to put a burden on the judicial system, and in turn you're going to put burdens on the correctional system. And so it's a matter of, in the initial stages, of resources and the political will.
Political will is important, but when you speak of the incarceration and the custodial issues, the prisons are overcrowded.
Yes.
They were built in the 18th century, maybe, and the capacity of these prisons are 10 times more, the occupation are 10 times more than the capacity of these prisons. Also, it appears that many hardcore criminals, once incarcerated, because of the corruption in the system, have an opportunity to continue to direct crime from inside the prison. Have you seen anything being done in Jamaica or elsewhere in the Caribbean to help to put a stop to that kind of behavior?
Well, some of the things that you just mentioned happening in the prison system, they happen with the full knowledge and consent of the wardens, the people who are there to oversee, to make sure that they do what they're supposed to do in prison. They recently arrested a whole group of that group in Jamaica. So there is movement afoot to try and stem the tide of corruption. But look, when you have criminals in prison making records, and you have criminals in prison still controlling their criminal enterprise, when you have a failure on the part of the correction institutions to bring dogs in that can actually detect cell phones. I mean, can you imagine this? You're in the prison and you have a cell phone and you're making calls as if you're outside. I mean, again, they have to revisit the idea of reforming the entire system. It's not enough to just do piecemeal fixes here and there, because the problem is going to show up somewhere else.
Let me ask you a quick question on this one, because with the advent of new technology, what is to prevent someone on the inside that is directing a criminal enterprise on the outside from having stuff delivered to them by drone, considering the openness of the prisons in Jamaica?
If they wanted to do it, they wouldn't be stopped. I can tell you that. And then also you have to take into consideration that the system is reactive. It's not proactive. It's not predictive. So something has to happen before they make changes. They don't think about these things. Or if they do nothing about them. And the reason is going to be we don't have enough resources.
So far we've concentrated in this program on the crime problems in Jamaica. But this is something that permeates across the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. In Trinidad, for instance, there were reports of threats against Carnival by potential terrorists, and 13 arrests were made. The arrests were driven by intelligence provided by the United States. But one of the reactions I saw to that, one individual said the U.S. should butt out of our problems and deal with their own. Realistically, can Caribbean countries fight crime and violence and provide security across the region without the U.S. intelligence that is provided to them?
Let me give you a simple example. Cybercrime, for example.
Yeah.
You have a lot of Caribbean people in prison, incarcerated in the U.S. system, and they're being deported in record numbers. They go back to the various islands, and there's no intelligence about these people. Who are they? What were they arrested for? Their capabilities, and so on and so forth. One of the things that I would propose is, look, if you get that list saying that Mr. X or Mr. Y, they're coming back, one of the things that we need to do is, and we can do this, we don't have to depend on the U.S. to be in the forefront of everything. I mean, they'll be our partners. One of the things that we haven't done that we should do is, we should go back to the Bureau of Prisons to find out, okay, what was this person arrested for, the length of sentence, their roommates, who sent them money, who do they call, who do they hang out with, where do they hang out in the prison system, and so on and so forth. So you can get a full picture before for example, if you found out that there's somebody who's being deported, but that person was hanging out in prison with Nigerians, Ukrainians, Russians, Romanians, you have a pretty good idea what that person is going to be doing when they get back to the Caribbean. More likely than not, it's going to be cybercrime. We don't do any of that. So they come back and they register in cases where they're required, and then they melt into the local community. And then the next thing you know, there's a cyber attack, and we're wondering, where did this come from? How could this be possible? So we're not doing a good job in terms of trying to lead the effort to conduct our own intelligence, and there's a dependency on the U.S. to provide all of this information. And there are things that we can do for ourselves.
What about training?
There's always a need for training. Always a need for training. And you can do it two ways. You can train the trainer, you can have them come to the U.S., have trained the trainer, they go back, or you can have people from here go there and impart their skills.
Because building an intelligence architecture in any other countries in the Caribbean will take not only sophisticated training, but also take equipment How do Caribbean countries expect to reach a level of intelligence capacity to deal with the kind of crimes that we are facing in the Caribbean?
It goes back to the political will, and it's my opinion that if you do enough digging, you'll find that there are certain politicians involved. They have a stake in some of what's going on, and so the idea is we don't want to get our people up to speed, because for fear that then they start looking in places where they shouldn't be looking, and so we suppress the idea that we need to get them up to speed. We need to, broaden their base of intelligence or their base of experience. And so we just keep them, and we just continue the same process over and over again. And that's why there's a movement afoot in Jamaica right now to hire the next police commissioner from outside, because they said, look, we've been doing the same thing over and over and over again. We've been elevating people from within, and they come with no new ideas. It's the same thing over and over again.
I was about to come to the revolving chair of commissioners that Jamaica has been going through in the past few years. And none of the commissioners so far, all of them from within the force, seem to have an answer to the crime problem.
But if I hear correctly, we're saying that, there is this corruption and we're not sharing information. So, I mean, I also feel that they sometimes feel that their hands are tied. What can they do? Because if you reach a certain point and there's higher power above you, you can't go left, you can't go right. So if there's not the will to solve it and all hands are not on deck, then this won't happen ever.
Hence the clarion call for an outsider, because what you'll find is that some of these commissioners going through the revolving door, they're beholden to the politicians or the powers that be. And so the idea is, if you get somebody from the outside who's experienced and knowledgeable enough, then they come in, they can make their own independent decisions. They don't have to depend on a politician telling them where to look or where not to look. And that's where the idea of corruption seeps into
right. I want to thank both of you for spending the time with us here today. There's a whole lot more that we could be covering on this subject, but it would take a very long time for us to get into that. But I want to thank SHA-SHANA, CRIGHTON, Wilfred Rattigan, our two guests today on Carib Nation. Thank you very much.